I'm working on a much longer episode about the Mummy series, but the legwork of getting through 14 movies and then writing all of my thoughts, critiques, and so on are holding me up on that episode. So to hold us off a bit, I'm going to be doing some build up with some historical context around mummies, the Western world's fascination with Egypt, otherwise known as Egyptomania, and the idea of the cursed tomb. The mummy is defined as a dead human or an animal whose soft tissues and organs have been preserved by either intentional or accidental exposure to chemicals, extreme cold, very low humidity, or lack of air, so that the recovered body does not decay further if kept in cool and dry conditions. With this definition, we find mummies around the world. In addition to the mummies of ancient Egypt, deliberate mummification was a feature of several ancient cultures in areas of America and Asia with very dry climates. Before this discovery, the oldest known deliberate mummy was a child, one of the Chinchorro mummies found in the Camarões Valley in Chile, which dates around 5050 BC. The oldest known naturally mummified human corpse is a severed head dated as old as 6,000 years old, found in 1936 at the Cueva de las Momias in Argentina. Other cultures that practiced mummification came from such places as the Canary Islands, where the indigenous Guanche people would practice mummification where the level of care taken in the process varied depending on one's social status. Then there's the Czech Republic, although the evidence of its intentional practice is debated. And then the pre-Columbian Mexico area has evidence of intentional mummification by the Aztec. The mummies found across China are considered to be accidental mummification rather than deliberate practices performed by these cultures. There are several regions across the world where accidental mummification has also occurred by various means, including climate or because the bodies were sunk in a bog. The bogs can mummify a body because of the acidity of the water, low temperature, and a lack of oxygen, which all combine to tan the body's skin and soft tissues. This leaves the skeleton to disintegrate over time. We also have cases of modern mummies. In the 1830s, Jeremy Bentham, the founder of utilitarianism, left instructions to be followed upon his death, which led to the creation of a sort of modern-day mummy. He asked that his body be displayed to illustrate how the, quote, horror at dissection originates in ignorance, end quote. During the early 20th century, the Russian movement of Cosmism, as represented by Nikolai Fyodorov, envisioned scientific resurrection of dead people. The idea was so popular that after Vladimir Lenin's death, Leonid Krasin and Alexander Bogdanov suggested to cryonically preserve his body and brain in order to revive him in the future. Necessary equipment was purchased abroad, but for a variety of reasons the plan was not realized. Instead, his body was embalmed and placed on permanent exhibit at the Lenin Mausoleum in Moscow, where it is displayed to this day. In late 19th century Venezuela, a German-born doctor named Gottfried Nuck conducted experiments in mummification in his laboratory in the forests near La Guaira. He developed an embalming fluid based on aluminum chloride compound that mummified corpses without having to remove the internal organs. The formula for his fluid was never revealed and has not been discovered. Most of the several dozen mummies created with the fluid, including himself and his immediate family, have been lost or were severely damaged by vandals and looters. In 1975, an esoteric organization by the name of Summum introduced modern mummification, a service that utilizes modern techniques along with aspects of ancient methods of mummification. The first person to formally undergo Summum's process of modern mummification was the founder of Summum, Sunum Bonum Amun-Ra, who died in January 2008. Summum is currently considered to be the only, quote, commercially mummification business, end quote, in the world. So this leads to the treatment of ancient mummies in the modern era. In the Middle Ages, a mistranslation of the Arabic word for bitumen led to the belief that mummies had healing properties, prompting the practice of grinding Egyptian mummies into powder for medicinal use. As mummies became scarce, merchants substituted other bodies, including those of criminals and slaves. Notable figures like Francis Bacon and Robert Boyle recommended mummies for treating bruises and preventing bleeding. The trade was frowned upon by Egyptian authorities, with instances of imprisonment for boiling mummies to make oil. However, the practice persisted in Europe, with mummies being sold for medicinal purposes and even used in art as a pigment known as mummy brown. The business continued into the late 16th century, with mummies still believed to have medicinal value in the 18th century. Artists used mummy to create paints until the 19th century, when alternative compositions replaced it. Additionally, mummified cats were exported to England for use as fertilizer. In the 19th century, with the rise of Egyptology, European aristocrats often engaged in unwrapping mummies for entertainment, which led to the destruction of many mummies. There were also rumors about using mummies as locomotive fuel and in paper production. but these claims are largely debunked as unverified and or exaggerated, with no solid evidence supporting their authenticity. Despite the widespread use of mummies in various ways, the legitimacy of some of these practices, such as making paint or paper, remains questionable. Now, before we talk about Egyptomania, I think we should lay some foundation with a definition. Egyptomania and Egyptology are academically different. Egyptomania is a social phenomenon that has very little to do with actual Egypt, and more often than not, belongs to the realm of popular culture. It is related to Egyptology only in so much as when new and fascinating finds or scholarly discoveries will then stir up popular imagination. The term Egyptomania, with the Greek Egypto for Egypt and mania meaning madness or fury, refers to enthusiasm for everything related to ancient Egypt. This interest is not just scientific, and Egyptian and Egyptianizing motifs have often been adopted throughout visual culture, including architecture, clothing, and jewelry. It should be noted that Egyptomania started as far back as the 5th century BC, with the Greeks and Roman as evidenced in texts such as Herodotus' Histories in the 5th century BC and the Bibliotheca Historica by Diodorus Siculus in the early 1st century BC. The high official Caius Cestius, for instance, erected a pyramid-shaped tomb, and Emperor Hadrian, who visited Egypt himself in AD 130, had his deceased lover, Antinous, venerated as Osiris, the ancient god of the underworld. After Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign to Egypt from 1798 to 1801, a new wave of Egyptomania hit Europe, and in 1822, Jean-François Champollion deciphered the hieroglyphs using the Rosetta Stone which Napoleon's troops had found in 1799. This was the beginning of the scientific Egyptology. When Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon's discoveries of the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in 1922, ancient Egypt took the world by storm once again. We'll get into this in much more detail in the next section. It was not only the find itself that ignited public curiosity, but also the tale of the Mummy's curse, which supposedly killed Lord Carnarvon in 1923. During the height of Egyptomania, interest in Egypt was largely experienced through literature, art, and architecture, as few people could afford to visit the country directly. These elements came to symbolize exotism, romance, and mysticism. The popular stories that circulated about Egypt often focused on themes like the search for immortality and eternal love, reflecting deep human desires. Through symbols such as obelisks, sphinxes, and pyramids, Egyptomania visually embodied those longings. European designers would reference Egyptian ornament for much of the 19th century. Silver, glass, furniture, and ceramics could often be seen, including obelisks, hieroglyphs, pyramids, or sphinxes. The ingrainment of Egyptomania and modern culture and society in the Western world was also further pushed by secret societies like the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Theosophists. They not only adopted Egyptianizing symbolism, pseudo-accoutrements, but also often claimed to be direct heirs of ancient Egyptian mystery schools and of magical traditions practiced by the ancient priests or the guardians of the skills and esoteric knowledge of ancient master builders. This mania has continued its popularity into this century with pop culture by way of TV and movie use, as well as music, while the decorative motif itself has subsided. The phenomenon of Tupmania emerged following the 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb by British archaeologist Howard Carter and his benefactor, Lord Carnarvon. Initially, the story was portrayed in Britain as a national triumph, with Carter and Carnarvon celebrated as heroes. Carnarvon and his daughter even visited Buckingham Palace to share their findings with King George and Queen Mary. While the curse of the mummy myth, which suggested that disturbing the tomb would provoke a vengeful curse, wasn't a new concept. In fact, there had been many stories of curses on Egyptian tombs, including Louisa May Alcott's 1869 tale, Lost in a Pyramid, The Mummy's Curse. The idea gained further traction after the death of Lord Carnarvon, who succumbed to an infected mosquito bite in Cairo. Sherlock Holmes' author, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was among those who warned of the dangers of a curse descending on any who disturbed the pharaoh's resting place. The death fueled sensationalized stories about the curse. Lord Carnarvon's death was not the only one popularly attributed to Tutankhamun's curse. Other victims included George J. Gould I, a visitor to the tomb, Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist invited to x-ray Tutankhamun's mummy, A.C. Mace, a member of Carter's excavation team, Mervyn Herbert, Carnarvon's half-brother, Richard Bethel, Carter's secretary, as well as Howard Carter, despite having died 16 years after the opening of the tomb. There is some potential that the toxic spores of the fungus Aspergillus flavus, besides possibly contributing to deaths following a 1973 tomb opening in Poland, may have also contributed to some of the alleged Tutankhamun-related deaths, particularly the deaths of Lord Carnarvon, George J. Gould, and Arthur Mace, though this link has been disputed. Tutmania was a new, broader wave of Egyptomania that influenced various cultural areas, including music, architecture, fashion, and design. Media advances like photography, telegrams, and cinema allowed the contents of the tomb to be shared worldwide. The discovery of the tomb's extraordinary treasures, along with the exotic appeal of Egyptian culture, greatly impacted the 1920s, particularly in Art Deco design. Egyptian-inspired fashions such as flapper styles with bobbed hair and bold eye makeup became popular, while beauty products like the Velaz Egyptian face mask capitalized on the trend. The fascination with the tomb's riches, combined with the allure of Egypt's mysterious death rituals and afterlife beliefs, resonated deeply with the post-World War I when many had experienced personal loss. Although Tutankhamun himself was not a politically significant ruler, the preservation and grandeur of his tomb solidified his place in history. His legacy continues today through traveling exhibitions and popular souvenirs. The timing of Tutankhamun's discovery, coupled with the sensationalized curse and the global fascination with ancient Egyptian culture, cemented his place in modern memory, as well as the curse of the mummy. And that has provided some historical context for what is behind the mummy and the mummy's curse.